Morning, John.
Good morning.
As I've briefed you, the purpose of this interview is to establish how you've progressed from being a lad living near Sutton Park in Birmingham, England, to becoming the much called for preacher of the gospel that you are today. Would you like to share with us some memories of your youth, your conquests of Sutton Park with your friends, and then touch on music, because I know music has been a great influence in your life, and I'm thinking that it would be interesting. I've seen your library of music and it's phenomenal, so I'd like to know where that has come from as well. Shoot ahead.
Well, I was of course raised as a small boy inside the Adventist church, and music actually was the first thing I responded to, according to my mother. So it was already there. And also as a child, I found that I could pitch my notes perfectly and sing. So this side was already there and inside me very, very, and they were aware of it very quickly. Yes, I was brought up inside the church, and of course we came down to Birmingham from the north, which is where I was. And so I lived for the first 7 years of my life, really, 5 or 6 years of my life. I lived around Birmingham, and so was taken to, first of all, the Nineveh Road Church, where you ended up in a back room with all these pictures of Jesus, you know, the birth, the resurrection, the death, and all the rest of it. So you, from a child, we were pretty well, shall we say, aware of the fact that we were in a church dealing with Jesus and everything that happened to him. It was always there, and also I had this book, which my aunt had, actually, Aunt Hetty. She had this book which was all in black and white, but it was an illustration of the Bible right the way through, from creation straight the way through to the second coming in the new earth. So I had it in front of me, all in illustration form, and some of it was quite terrifying. I mean, I always found the Old Testament much more interesting than the New Testament, because it was full of battles and horrors and all sorts of things.
And you love history, don't you, John?
I love history. I absolutely adored it. I found really took to history, and so you know, and some of it was quite incidentally very frightening. When you look at it, you know, sheet lightning, people fleeing in all directions, judgments of God falling all over the place. So you do get a view of God at one level of a God who comes and saves. At the other level, you get a God who frightens everyone to death. And perhaps an illustration of this was, as a small boy, I must have been about 7 at the time, and I'd gone up to the local shop on the you know, the days when we used to have corner shops, and I was on my way back, and there was a terrific clap of thunder above me. It was absolutely extraordinary, just tremendous, absolutely crashed everywhere, and I fled down the road. And I dashed into the house and announced to my parents that the second coming had arrived. And that,
oh, how lovely!
And you'd only that could only come from somebody who'd been reading this sort of literature, brought up in that sort of milieu. You know, but it really was quite amazing, the situation. But yes, I was brought up inside this, and continued to be in it on a regular basis, really, until my mother had a serious disagreement with the church that she was in, and effectively we then moved towards virtually not going to church at all. So for most of my teens, from certainly the age of about 12, 13, right up until 21, I didn't step into an Adventist church except on the odd occasion.
Okay, John, what about your music? You sang in a choir at one time when you were youth, didn't you?
Well, I sang. Well, not. I sang in the I sang it in the college choir where I taught. But actually, I didn't join a choir at all until I sang at church. You know, there 2 or 3 occasions where I sang at church, and as a kid at Erdington Church, and really that was it. But I always loved music, and I always sat down listening to the organ. But my real awareness of things was that, you know, we had a gramophone records, which in those days were 78s, and you only heard bits of things. Then one day when I was 11, I watched the entire ballet Sleeping Beauty, and I wanted that music, and so my parents actually bought a gramophone with the appropriate stylus on and everything, and I went out to see if I could get this music. And of course, in those days there were no box sets or anything. You know, you always had just snippets of it put onto an LP. The LPs had just started really in those days, so I was able to do this, and out of this eventually I started to discover the great classical composers. And then my parents joined the World Record Club for a time, and that increased the understanding of it. By the time I was 15, to my mother's horror, my father wasn't too bothered, but my mother really was. I was into Bartok, and she she banned Bartok from her hearing.
Yes, I can imagine her doing that as well.
Yes, oh, she did. She showed me I could play it as long as she wasn't within hearing distance of it.
Well, Auntie Margaret, your mother was a very dominant figure.
Oh yes,
John.
But
I remember my father, your Uncle George. I remember him coming home one day, and he shared with us his praise for your insights into the gospel. Now, I think you were about 21, 22 at the time.
I'd have been 21.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Would you like to share with us your insights
well,
regards
of course,
to that?
Of course, I was doing. You see, by the time I was that age, I had been doing A level RE, A level biblical studies. So I did start to become aware of certain things that Jesus did, and of course it was out of this moment with Matthew's gospel that I came to this epiphany, serious epiphany, because all the way through my teens, although I'd not been directly involved with the Adventist Church, from the age of 17 onwards, I became involved with someone who actually was a Catholic, and I had students around me during my A level who had Methodist backgrounds, and I'd never met these people before. So here I was, sort of sitting inside a Catholic church, listening to all this, and it was really quite interesting. And also with the Anglican Church as well, when they were all discussing the unity meetings with the Methodists. So actually, I sat amongst all these people while they were talking about this, and I went to several services, Anglican and Catholic services, and also one in the Methodist Church. So at this moment, I was sort of not entirely immune from it, but you know, I wasn't within the Adventist community, but I was at these moments of meeting with other Christians. But at this, the reason why things changed radically from being just on the edges of things to having to seriously think about this, and my movement back again into church life, was what happened to me on that night in the A level class. And where it became, you know, as I was reading this section of Matthew, we were dealing with the prayer life, Jesus and prayer life, interestingly, and it dawned on me absolutely. It was almost as if a light bulb came on. I sat there and I realized this was true, and that moment completely affected me for the whole of my life, really. That particular, and other things, of course, thinking back on it, probably he was leading me in a different, but this was the moment when that epiphany took place. And that's why I started to think about shifting. And through the whole of that year, as I told Peter Dixon, through the whole of that year, it was like I was in a boat being steered by somebody else, because I came all the way down. And the next thing I found in March, I was at a meeting, a creationist meeting, which was run at Nottingham University, where I started to meet people who I'd known as a child, and started to talk to them. And then of course I I came down to see you in Birmingham, and I sat and talked with your dad over things, and that led me eventually. He suggested that I probably think about Newbold, and I really do think that it was the right way to go, because spiritually speaking, I needed Newbold more than Newbold certainly needed me. that's certainly so, and it really gave me my theological background in order to do certain things that I certainly couldn't have done without it.
Okay, hold on just there a minute, John. You've missed out your baptism. Now, I know that you had a discussion with God. Share that with us.
Oh, well, yeah, at the very beginning, when I had this epiphany, the Spirit moved in. I told God that He would get me to believe in this, all right, but He would never get me. I wasn't going to join anything, and I certainly wasn't going to end up in any tank. That's what I told him at the beginning of the year. By November, I'd exactly what I'd done. I ended up standing in a tank during the half term. And I mean, I'd gone to Newbold, not even a member of the church.
Yeah.
So I eventually had to do this. And
okay.
And so yes, I was indeed baptized, and I never regretted this. Whatever arguments I might have with things, I've never actually regretted that, because I was baptized into the Godhead, as we all are, and we are reenacting the death and resurrection of Jesus and the death and resurrection of ourselves. And so that I've always been able to separate from denominational claim, always.
Yeah.
And now that was very important to me, to realize that I had to be able to separate my faith in Christ. It had to be very separate from my denominational practice.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's why I realized this at Newbold, and while I was there, it was very, very clear to me that you needed to do this. You needed to have a personal faith that transcended the church and transcended everything. Otherwise, you get lost.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you've touched on two things I'd like to bring up now. Your personal faith and relationship with Jesus. But firstly, you've mentioned Newbold College.
Yes.
Times. What experiences did you get while you were at Newbold College that set you up for the rest of your life?
Well, for a start, it was quite having to go through a multidisciplinary course for a start certainly was useful when I started to teach, because it meant I got material in my head that I was able to utilize immediately to build courses, which became very useful. The second thing perhaps is, and that's that I really came to understand that salvation is of Christ alone. This was very clear. It was clear in the Epistles of Paul class, and it was clear in the biblical theology class. Really, really and truthfully, I was being shown that when it comes down to salvation, nothing of you can end up in the box. It's all of Him. And that really had an effect on the point of the fact that there was, although I didn't actually realize this at the time, there is a conflict going on inside the church over this, and I met it amongst the Americans. And as I said to Peter Dixon, the Americans were absolutely marinated, of course, in Ellen White, because they had all this. When it came to understanding biblical stuff, there was a certain amount of difficulty, and I didn't realize this, and that's partly because, of course, I was so new to it. I mean, I hadn't been inside the church for years, so suddenly I now confronted Adventism on the global stage, which was something else, and but I didn't see the significance of this really till 1980. It wasn't. I really didn't see the significance of it till that moment when I was listening to the famous forum tape. And then I began to realize where the problems were.
Okay, now you've mentioned that you went into teaching, John.
Yes, I did.
Right. This was adult teaching, wasn't it?
Yes, it was always in FE. I've always been a teacher of adults.
Yes.
That's where I wanted to be.
What fields of expertise did you follow?
Well, I taught English. I taught English. I taught history. I taught biblical studies. I was given the philosophy brief when it came round. And I also taught creative writing.
Yes, I know. I attended your creative writing lessons. I also came to some of your history lessons as well. Absolutely fascinating. I also know, from what you've told me, that you put parts of the Bible to a qualification, John. Would you like to share that with us?
Oh yes, this happened because we had an association with 4 churches, and there were 4 Pentecostal churches. There was Bethel, Apostolic Union, Church of God and Prophecy, and New Testament. And what had happened was that the way the college was structured under the new funding system meant that they could actually widen themselves and use part of their funding regime to fund churches which had got students as part of the college. So you would put the congregation as students as part of the college. Then you had to give them things to do. Now, what the idea was initially was to take their Sunday school materials and to accredit those materials. And Rob Grant was in the middle of this, and he was looking for somebody to do it because he couldn't do it and he didn't know what to do. So he was told to come and see me. And at one point, Rob actually said to me, and it's extraordinary, he walked in and he said, "The Lord has told me to come to you." Now, Rob had a Pentecostal background.
Who was Rob, John?
He was a line manager in charge of this area of work in the college.
Okay.
And he suddenly told me this. He said, "I've been led to you because we need this stuff done and help you." So I found myself across there in this section of the college, which was the Black Country College, as it was called, and a sort of centre. And so I started having to wheel and deal with these people in their Sunday school lessons, which I then put into units for accreditation through NCFE initially. But at the same time I was doing that, we decided to modularize the Bible, and also to turn the Bible into sections, book by book, and to also get those done through OCN accredited, so that people could actually have a series of certificates, actual knowledgeable, and then also to write some of the materials for this. Now, I'd already written a lot of these materials because I've been teaching biblical studies for about 15 or 16 years by then, and so I had quite a group of material which I was able to draw on. But we did actually get the whole of the area done through OCN and through half the Bible accredited, and parts of the New Testament, parts of the Old Testament. And then what we did, we turned it into a access course, and with related modules, which they could actually do, and that would give them, of course, access to university. So actually, we did that all in 1 year. War, absolutely.
Very busy year.
Yeah, plus my teaching, which didn't stop.
Okay, so while all this is going on in your profession, you were also in leadership positions in your local church. Can you share the experiences that you had there with us?
Well, what I did there was, of course, I was an elder there, and the first elder of this particular congregation, and and so I carried on preaching. Basically, I was preaching my way through Mark's Gospel, and eventually started, this was in the 1970s, early 1970s, and eventually I started to work my way into John's Gospel, which I'd already done at A-level. And I did it bit by bit. And the reason I did John gradually is because I didn't think I'd grown spiritually enough to be able to tackle the text. Okay. I really do think there are some things inside the Bible that you have to come to after many years of consideration and thinking about them. It's not something which
I know what you mean.
You can just walk into it. And but I did start on the bits that I could understand and knew and had grasped. And then I started to have to teach it. So there, when you start to teach something, you really have to know something. So that really meant that my sermons in this area started to expand. And it was while I was preaching around this area that I really started to talk to them about salvation by faith through grace and what it really was, in relationship to what I was rediscovering in John's Gospel. And that has continued to this day, because one of the things that I discovered was that I didn't know how on earth you could continue to preach from one week to another and carry on, and they're mostly one to probably 2 sermons in the quarter, carry on a ministry like this forever. And then I started to realize, as I looked through the biblical texts and started to look at them and probe into them, that this book was inexhaustible. And and that I would go back over the same material with more insights than I had before.
Yeah.
There was a growth process here that was really, when I look back on it, amazing. And I certainly could not preach the sermons that I did at the beginning now. They've moved on to such a degree of of knowledge and understanding that I am really, it's really at the cutting edge of yet again something else, which gives you an idea that God is inexhaustible. And that's why it's stupid to talk about, you can arrive at certain points in your sanctification, as some people think. They just don't know who they're worshipping. Sorry. They have no idea the nature of God they're worshipping.
Yes.
And the more you study theological matters and the more you actually look at this, certainly I discovered this when I was teaching, the more you realize that we were dealing with something completely out of anything that we were liable to ever meet in this world.
John, that leads on to another point that I'd like to hear from you about. I remember being enticed to come along with my mother and yourself and your mother and your dad to a meeting at Amersham. Now, what was all this about? What was Amersham about? Why was it set up? And what came out of it?
Well, Amersham, the first time I heard about Amersham was when Dr. John Woodfield wrote to me. He wrote me a letter asking me if I'd heard of the church in the wilderness, as he called it. And I had heard about this church in the wilderness. But of course, I knew him, and I also knew, of course, Dennis Porter. But I didn't know anybody else there. And then but I found out that Amersham had been initially put together because they were absolutely fed up of what they were getting at the churches they were at. This is what it was set up for. They were becoming very, very disgruntled with what they were getting there, and they weren't happy with certain things. And one of them said that they would love to be able to sit in a Sabbath school and have an intelligent discussion. Really, just a real intelligent discussion. And this is how it formed. Now, originally they started out somewhere else, but then eventually they lighted on Amersham because Amersham hadn't got an Adventist church there, so they weren't in competition with anything. That's why they went to Amersham. So this started in 1981, and the reason why it became quite a cauldron of I suppose opposition or radical thought, or what one of them described as the loyal opposition, is simply because when it arrived in 1981, it was just after Glacier View and after the events that happened there, and so they got hold of the document, the famous document of Glacier View, which expounded on the certain areas of church teaching and biblical teaching in relation to this. And Dennis had given read through it, and he actually gave a talk on it, in which he described it as a superlative piece of scholarship, which it is. And that's this. Suddenly, Amersham became a sort of forum or a cauldron for discussing the issues inside the Adventist Church, and particularly biblical and theological issues.
Okay, John, Dennis Porter, is this the Dennis Porter that was that was in charge of one of the libraries in Oxford University.
Yeah, he was in charge of the American documents in the Bodleian Library. He was one of the senior librarians in the Bodleian Library and
Okay.
at Oxford. And so he had his he had quite a he had quite a sort of not enormous knowledge, because he was able to put his hands on things that you couldn't see unless you were prepared to go and research inside this library. Um, the other thing is, and that's that I got involved with Amersham simply because when one of our ministers was sort of got resigned. We wasn't resigned really. He was sacked over having very similar views to myself. I actually wrote a letter to Dennis Porter, who had been visiting my parents, and they'd been talking about this. And I wrote to him, and I laid out exactly what I thought about these matters, these theological matters, and he shared that with Sidney Rose. And we know something about Sidney because we knew Duncan, his son, of course, who was a brilliant.
He was at Newbold College with you, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was indeed. He was absolutely brilliant at languages. He really was. He was a serious, and it was Duncan, and he was one of the key members of the Amersham group, one of the founder members, and so he wrote to me and he invited me to Charney Manor. And Charney Manor was the retreat that Amersham had every other year. So off I trogged into Oxfordshire to find this manor in the middle of nowhere, Charney. And there I started bumping again into some of the people I knew, and some of them I did not know. And they suddenly were aware of became very much aware of my presence, as it were, eventually over these things. And then I offered my services. They wanted a publication, and I offered my services as editor. So that's how Opinion started, and that's how Opinion started.
This is back in 1987, yes?
Yeah, it started in 1987, and it took a year to actually settle things down and decide what we were going to do. And then, of course, we had to get writers. So I thought that the best thing to do was to start to use the material which was being delivered to them in the afternoon, because they had a discussion, papers delivered and discussion in the afternoon. And out of those papers would come the bulk of what's actually written in Opinion. And the reason we called it Opinion is because that's exactly what it is. You don't necessarily have to agree with what the person's writing about or saying. We didn't want it as this notion of sort of arrogant present truth and all this sort of stuff. We wanted it as something which was very, very open, and that people could discuss things in, and that we could actually have a forum that people felt that they could involve themselves in. And we did it for the laity, and the laity could, this was for the laity by the laity. That's what we used to say about it, and that's exactly what it was to a certain degree. But Opinion itself, of course, it couldn't be put onto anything like we have it today, because it didn't exist. So we had to print off hard copies and send them all around the world. And we kept going by donations from all over the place. We never ran out of money, and we sent it to Andrews University. We sent it to various places who received it. Even the editor of the Italian Review had one. he asked for it. I had people actually asking for this thing, and I didn't even know it had got that far in understanding. People were talking about what was in it. So it was. And the first article we had was from Leslie Shaw. And Leslie Shaw, of course, was very well read in the Reformation theology. And so his first article was on the gospel. His first article was how we should understand the gospel. And that was very interesting. And if you go back to the first edition, you'll see there his article dealing with salvation by faith through grace and what Luther discovered, and the way in which what we needed to do. And so this really set up, as it were, the tenor of the way in which this event was going, this periodical was going to go. And I know that the press editor said he would take cognizance of it after he'd read it and given me his opinion. And he did give me his opinion. He was absolutely astonished at the scholarly activities going on in it. So we so we actually started, and I started a series on Hebrews, where I started to analyze the text of Hebrews. I think I got up to chapter 6, and I didn't realize the effect that this was having at all, because it was going out to various people. And then one day in the mid 80s, when Des Ford came over to see us, and he was talking in the Shire Hall, I went down to see him, to announce myself, who I was, and to shake his hand. And he looked at me and he said, "I know who you are." And I couldn't believe it. "You know who I am? You know, we've only just met." And he said, "Yes, I know who you are. You're the one writing on Hebrews." And when he said, "When you finished it, I'll buy it."
Maybe we ought to get that published, John.
Oh, well, I never finished it. I only got
No.
to chapter 6, chapter 7 in the there, and I really need to go back and look at it again. But
How long?
I was absolutely astonished. You know, here's one of our premier theologians who was telling me that he said he read through this with great interest in what I was saying. And
Yes, I know, John, that Des Ford actually utilized some of your writings in his book on Daniel. Tell us about that.
I'd written a review of Caio Rizzola's book, The End of Historicism, and I'd read this book right the way through, and I wrote a review of it for Opinion, and he wrote a review of the same book for Good News Unlimited. And what had happened was that his review of it had led to considerable fire from the editor of this Finnish sort of publication, the Finnish Review, who told him he didn't know what he was talking about. So he picked up Opinion when it arrived, and he read my review, and he then sent me a letter asking if he could use the review that I had written in GNU. And I said yes. And then he wrote to me and said, could he use it in his new commentary on Daniel as an appendix? And I said yes. And that's what he did. So it's Appendix 28. It's the last appendix in his new commentary on Daniel. And yes, the coming king, Daniel the coming king, and so he used it, and it's gone out. I mean, Gillian put it onto Facebook a few months ago, and people were astonished when they read it.
Gillian, this is Gillian Ford. You're talking
Gillian
about.
Ford, yeah, she put it onto the Des Ford sort of Facebook page that she utilizes, and so it was all out there, and because she found it in his stuff, you see, and all the rest of it after he died.
Okay, now I know that in 2013, 2014, you were looking at the prospects of expanding the Opinion magazine, publication, whatever you want to call it, the hard copy that was going around the world. And you sort of twisted my arm with regards to getting a website sorted. And I had to learn how to do HTML5 and build a website from scratch with the help of Kendall Down, a minister from North Wales.
Yeah.
Now, would you like to share with us about this website and what it's aiming for and how the Facebook page integrates with it?
Well, for a long time, I have been talking to Sydney about the possibility that we need to put Opinion online, and I said this is the way forward. The way forward for Opinion is not sending it out to people like we're doing it. It's actually to have all the archive copies online, and also putting editions and editorials online, and having people send things to you, editing them and then putting them, then this is because this is going to be the way people see things. Now he understood this, even though he didn't understand the technology of it or anything. He understood. He was a very aware man. Was Sidney, and very knowledgeable in certain areas as well. Immense, and so he got very excited at this. But unfortunately, really, when he reached the point of being a 90-year-old man and the like, it was very difficult any longer for him to come to Amersham. So he never actually saw what we did. But out of the discussions I had with him about the need to do this, eventually is the reason why I came to you, because you know, if anyone was going to be able to set up one of these things, you were able to do it. And I haven't got a clue. I'm I'm a Neanderthal when it comes to this sort of thing. Complete Neanderthal.
Yes, and I haven't progressed much beyond that anyway.
Well, much more than me.
Yeah, it's a matter of time.
And so I realized that if we were going to do this, we needed to do it. Now, what you suggested was that we actually have a Christian blog, and you also thought we could set up a forum and have all this as part of it. So actually, we did put opinion onto the website at first as a single. I think it was a single page, wasn't it, with all the things on it?
Yes.
And then eventually we progressed to having a Christian forum, which people could write to, and which we could expand, and we could actually put the gospel into effect outside, from outside to outside.
So
and that's really what it's there for.
Eventually, you utilise Facebook. Seeing how Gillian Ford was using Facebook, we came up with the idea of having a Facebook page, which correlated with the website. Now, on the website, we've got all the archives of the back editions from 1987 through to 2014 of the Opinion magazines themselves. And then on the website, we've got further information and some of your works on in the archives page of the different books and so on that are there. So now, if people go to the website www.opinionsda.info, I'll repeat that again, www.opinionsda.info, and they can link up with the Facebook page from there.
Yeah.
And so what is it exactly that you're actually aiming to do toward the future now?
Well, the basic thing now, of course, is to able. There's two things I would like people to do. I would first of all like people to write articles for the page. That's what I would like to do, because this is what we had before. But Amersham at the moment is probably not what it was back in those days. But what we need to do is we need people who are conscientious, who actually have knowledge and the rest of it in areas of faith and other things as well. Opinion had quite a broad brief, really, when you look at it. That we could do that, and people could send in articles to it, which we would then put on the website, if they're appropriate, put on the website. The other thing is, and that's that because we now have things like Zoom, and because we have a means by which we're able to speak and record things, we could therefore utilize this page in order to effectively put out sermons and studies and all sorts of things. And that's really what the way forward, I think, because it's quite clear to me the next generation isn't going to open up tomes of books. It will get on to things like this, and that's what we need to do. So what I want to do is a whole series of things, biblical things, in which I'm able to therefore express biblical matter and the like, and talk about it to an even wider audience now.
Okay.
At least before I throw off this mortal coil.
Yeah, well, I have a few months ahead of you, so
yeah, a few months ahead.
yes,
Not much,
okay,
but still.
What I'm going to do, John, when we put this video together, at the end of the video, I'm going to put in the website address and the Facebook address so that people
Yes.
can actually see where they can go to see this. Okay? And I want to thank you for your time. I must say that having you as a cousin and as a mentor to guide me through my hiccups in spiritual life has been very interesting, and I want to be able to get this out and share it as much as possible. So thanks very much, John. One final thought from you to round it off.
Well, one of the first things I think the blog should do, and also the forum should do, and indeed I have now tried to do, is to get people to empower themselves. We need to realize that as communicants inside a church that started off with people who empowered themselves, we need to do the same. And I do think that the members of the church, and indeed all churches, seriously need to take a grip on their spiritual lives and not to allow the institutions that they happen to be members of to overwhelm them. It's absolutely impossible. So really, there's a sort of independence that is required here, and curiosity of thought. People should need to be curious. Christians should be very curious about their faith. They shouldn't take it for granted that because they've signed up to a block of things, that's it. It isn't it. This is the beginning, and you know, God has made us with brains and ability and intelligence, and really and truthfully, we should sit down and we should be able to, as it were, search the scriptures together as we're supposed to do, and understand things, and also to tackle things as well, even uncomfortable things. You know, let's be brave, at least in the middle of this world, and that's what we need to do.
Well, thank you ever so much, John. Now, I know that before we started this interview today, you were sharing with me your thoughts on the nature of humanity and the relationship that we have with God, and that you're planning on doing another interview on that subject in the near future. So our viewers can look forward to that. It won't be too long before we get that done. So would you like to share with us exactly a brief overview of what's coming next?
Well, first of all, I would like any viewers to actually see what Esme Branner has done. She sent me a YouTube of herself. It was her third talk, which was dealing with the biological reasons why we couldn't be sinless, which is very interesting because obviously she's a scientist and she's well into microbiology. And so I've actually shared this with somebody. I've shared this with Lance over in the Philippines, and I shall be sending it to you as well. And we could probably put that on.
Okay, we'll add that to the page, the web page.
Basically, if you want to really understand the potency of the gospel, you have to first of all accept that the human race is in an impossibly fallen state. And only when you understand that and understand how bad we actually are, it's very depressing really to think about this, but actually most people like to think that they're good eggs, you know, and they do things right and they love people and all the rest of it. But in fact, when it comes down to it, the basic core of humanity is according to scripture, we're wicked. And that's why, you know, which is why God justifies the wicked.
As Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, our every thought is sin.
Is sin? Yeah, we're a walking sin bag. No, if you
thank you very much.
That's right. Well, that's what we are, and you know, I mean, I even shocked them, I think, a bit at Leamington because I actually described the human race as a bastardized race. I said,
oh dear. Well, I'm thinking, John, that maybe
comparison to what we are. So out of this understanding of the totality of what we are and the disintegration of what we are, we actually require somebody who can, as it were, cover us. And the gospel The good news is that that's exactly what God did, and does. And so this leads us to a proper understanding of how the good news actually works, and what we need to do, and what we need to believe and understand in relationship to who Jesus is as the God man.
Amen to that.
Remember that the Bible is based on four main pillars, four main propositions: creation, the fall, redemption, restoration. And once that is understood, you begin to understand exactly how God, because we've only had an action in one of them, and that's the fall. Look at the disaster we've got around us. So effectively, we are looking now at the situation of seeing a God who does operate inside the world in a particular way, and also is having to contain the world and contain humanity as much as possible from its lunacy, which we see on the news every day.
Okay, well, thanks ever so much, John. It's been very enlightening to actually speak with you and share this with the world. So I'm just going to close this video down now. And as I said, we'll be putting the website www.opinionsda.info. That will be on this video, along with the Facebook page as well. And hopefully people will gain a blessing from that. Thank you ever so much, John, and you have a good day now.
Yes.
Right,
okay.
bye.
Bye then.